The moment that destroyed my marriage wasn't finding suspicious text messages, wasn't discovering secret credit card charges, wasn't walking in on my husband with another woman. It was my 8-year-old son, Tommy, racing into our kitchen after his Saturday morning soccer practice, his face flushed with excitement as he announced, "Mommy, I saw Daddy at the train station, and he's not going alone on his work trip." The innocent joy in his voice as he described seeing his father with a really pretty lady with long hair made my blood turn to ice, because I knew with absolute certainty that Michael's business trip to Chicago was supposed to be a solo conference attendance, a 3-day obligation that required him to travel alone and focus entirely on professional development. When I asked Tommy who the woman was, his response shattered 12 years of trust with 7 devastating words. "I don't know." But Daddy looked really happy. In that instant, watching my son's confusion as my face changed from curiosity to horror, I realized that my husband hadn't just been lying about the nature of his business travels. He had been using our family's trust and routine as cover for a double life that my own child had accidentally witnessed, turning an 8-year-old boy into an unwitting observer of his father's systematic betrayal of everything we had built together. The details Tommy shared about seeing his father at the train station weren't the casual observations of a child who had spotted someone familiar in a crowd. They were the specific, enthusiastic descriptions of a boy who had been genuinely excited to see his daddy and had watched long enough to notice things that made the encounter memorable. He described how Michael had been laughing with the woman, how he had carried her suitcase along with his own, how they had walked together toward the departure platform, like they were going on vacation, not work. Tommy had called out to his father, but the noise of the station and the distance between them meant Michael hadn't heard him, hadn't known that his careful deception had been witnessed by the one person whose innocent observations could destroy the elaborate lie he had been maintaining for months, possibly years. What made Tommy's revelation particularly devastating was the casual way he delivered it, the complete absence of awareness that he was describing something that would fundamentally change our family forever. He spoke about seeing his father with another woman the same way he might talk about spotting a neighbor at the grocery store. It was just an interesting coincidence that made him feel connected to his dad's important work life. His innocence was so complete, his trust in his father so absolute, that it had never occurred to him to question why this beautiful woman was accompanying Daddy on a business trip, why they looked so comfortable and happy together. Why the scene he had witnessed didn't match the story we had been told about Michael's professional obligations and solo travel requirements. For 12 years, I had built my identity around being Michael's supportive wife and Tommy's devoted mother, around the family we had created through careful planning and shared sacrifice. Our marriage had begun as a partnership between 2 ambitious people who recognized in each other the kind of determination and integrity that could build something lasting and meaningful. Michael's career in pharmaceutical sales required extensive travel, but we had discussed this before marriage and agreed that the financial benefits and professional opportunities justified the challenges of frequent separation. I had shaped my own career around his schedule, choosing freelance work that allowed me flexibility to manage our household and raise Tommy while Michael built the professional reputation that would provide our family's financial foundation. The life we had created together was everything I had imagined during our early conversations about family and future, when we would plan elaborate strategies for balancing career advancement with committed parenting and maintaining intimacy, despite the demands of professional travel. Our home was warm and organized. Our finances were stable and growing. Our son was thriving in school and activities that reflected our shared values and careful attention to his development. Michael's frequent absences were challenging but manageable because I believed they served our family's long-term interests, because I trusted that his dedication to work was ultimately dedication to us, because his stories about conferences and client meetings and professional obligations painted a picture of sacrifice in service of our shared goals and dreams. But Tommy's innocent observation forced me to re-examine every business trip. Every explanation, every moment when my instincts had whispered that something seemed slightly off about Michael's travel stories, but my loyalty had convinced me to dismiss those doubts as the insecurities of a wife who missed her husband rather than the intuition of a woman whose trust was being systematically exploited. The conferences that always seemed to occur in cities with excellent restaurants and entertainment. The client meetings that required weekend travel when most business obligations happened during weekday hours. The professional development opportunities that arose with suspicious frequency during seasons when family time was most precious and expected. The travel schedule that had seemed reasonable and necessary for Michael's career. Advancement now appeared potentially calculated to provide maximum opportunity for maintaining relationships outside our marriage, for building connections that had nothing to do with pharmaceutical sales and everything to do with personal satisfaction and romantic excitement. 3 days in Chicago became 3 days with someone who made him look really happy in ways that apparently weren't happening when he was home with his wife and son. The business conferences became romantic getaways funded by our family budget, justified through professional necessity, but serving entirely personal purposes that excluded and betrayed the people who supported his success and celebrated his achievements. The most painful aspect of Tommy's revelation wasn't just learning that Michael was traveling with another woman. It was realizing that my son had been witnessing pieces of his father's secret life, carrying information about adult situations he was too young to understand. Observing behavior that contradicted the family narrative he had been taught to believe and trust. Every time Michael returned from a business trip with stories about boring meetings and difficult clients, Tommy had been processing memories of seeing his father happy and intimate with someone who wasn't his mother. The cognitive dissonance must have been confusing for a child whose understanding of family loyalty and commitment was being contradicted by evidence his own eyes had provided, but his heart couldn't interpret. The investigation I conducted after Tommy's innocent revelation was the most systematic and thorough detective work I had ever undertaken. Driven by the need to understand not just whether Michael was having an affair, but how long it had been happening, how many of his business trips had been lies, how extensively our family's trust and resources had been redirected toward relationships and activities I knew nothing about. The travel receipts and credit card statements told a story that became impossible to deny once I knew what questions to ask. Hotel rooms booked for 2 people, restaurant charges that far exceeded what one person would spend alone, entertainment expenses that suggested romantic activities rather than professional obligations. The pattern that emerged from examining 2 years of Michael's travel expenses was devastating in its consistency and scope. Every single business trip had included evidence of companion accommodations and romantic activities, from weekend conferences that became extended vacations to supposedly urgent client meetings that involved expensive dinners and couples entertainment. The financial infrastructure of Michael's affair had been hiding in plain sight, camouflaged among legitimate business expenses and professional obligations, invisible only to the wife who trusted her husband completely, and had no reason to audit their family finances for evidence of systematic betrayal and deception. But the most damning evidence came from Michael's social media accounts, which I had never thought to examine before Tommy's observation gave me reason to question everything I believed about my husband's character and commitment. The photos revealed a relationship that had been developing for over 18 months. Complete with romantic dinners and weekend getaways, and the kind of intimate happiness that belongs to people who believe they're building something special and permanent together. The woman's name was Diane, and she was a pharmaceutical sales representative from another region, someone Michael had met during a legitimate business conference, who had apparently become the real purpose behind every subsequent professional travel opportunity. The timeline of Michael's relationship with Diane coincided perfectly with changes. in our marriage that I had attributed to normal evolution and the stresses of balancing career advancement with family responsibilities. The decreased intimacy between us had begun right around the time his first photos with Diane appeared on his social media accounts. The reduction in family activities and couple time corresponded, with increased frequency of business, travel, and professional obligations that required his absence during weekends and holidays when family connection should have been prioritized. Even his interaction with Tommy had changed, becoming more distant and distracted, as if his emotional investment was being redirected toward someone whose existence I had never suspected. What made the social media evidence particularly painful was seeing how genuinely happy Michael appeared in his photos with Diane, how relaxed and present he seemed in ways that had become increasingly rare during his time at home with Tommy and me. With Diane, he was laughing more freely, engaging more fully in activities and conversations, displaying the kind of spontaneous affection and joy that had originally attracted me to him during our college years. But that had been gradually disappearing from our marriage. The contrast was devastating, but also illuminating. Apparently, Michael was capable of the kind of emotional availability and romantic engagement I had been hoping to rediscover in our relationship. But he had been reserving those qualities for someone else, while presenting me with an increasingly distant and distracted version of himself. Before I tell you how I used Tommy's innocent observation to expose Michael's systematic deception and reclaim our family's future, I need to ask you something that has haunted me since that Saturday morning in our kitchen. Have you ever discovered that your child has been witnessing pieces of your spouse's betrayal without understanding what they were seeing? Carrying information that could change your life while remaining innocently unaware of its significance. Have you ever realized that while you were focused on supporting your partner's career and maintaining family stability, they were using that very stability as cover for activities that threatened everything you were working to protect? If you've ever felt like you were living in a family where some stories didn't quite add up, and some explanations required you to ignore your own observations, subscribe to this channel now. Because what I discovered after Tommy's casual comment about seeing his father at the train station isn't just about infidelity. It's about how people can use the trust of children to facilitate the betrayal of adults. How innocence can become a weapon against the very people who are working hardest to preserve and protect it. The investigation that followed my son's innocent observation will change how you think about business trips, about family trust, about the stories we tell ourselves to avoid seeing uncomfortable truths about the people we love most completely. The conversation I had with Tommy about what he had seen at the train station was the most delicate interrogation of my life, requiring me to extract information without alarming him, or making him feel responsible for adult problems he couldn't understand or control. I approached it as a series of casual questions spread over several days, designed to seem like natural curiosity about his soccer practice and the interesting things he had observed during his morning activities. When had he seen Daddy? Right after Coach said we could get water before we had to go home. How far away had he been? Pretty close, but there were lots of people walking around. How long had he watched? Until they went through the big doors and I couldn't see them anymore. Each answer Tommy provided painted a more detailed picture of Michael's deception and the extent to which our son had been witnessing evidence of his father's double life without understanding its significance. He described the woman as younger than you, Mommy, but older than my teacher, wearing fancy clothes like she was going somewhere special, carrying a suitcase with wheels like Daddy's, but smaller and prettier. The specificity of his observations suggested he had been watching for several minutes, long enough to notice details that would be memorable and worth sharing with excitement when he got home to tell his mother about the interesting coincidence of spotting his father during a routine Saturday morning. But the most revealing detail Tommy shared was his description of the interaction between Michael and Diane, the body language and behavior he had observed that suggested intimacy and familiarity, rather than professional courtesy or casual acquaintance. Daddy was holding her hand while they walked, and he was smiling like he does when he's really happy, like when I got an A on my math test, or when we go to the beach. The innocence of this comparison, linking his father's happiness with this strange woman to moments of genuine family joy and pride, was both heartbreaking and illuminating, revealing that Tommy had instinctively recognized something special and significant about what he had witnessed, even though he lacked the context to understand its implications. The private investigator I hired to document Michael's activities provided professional confirmation of what Tommy's observation and my own detective work had already revealed, but also uncovered additional layers of deception that made the betrayal even more systematic and comprehensive than I had imagined. Diane wasn't just Michael's mistress. She was someone he had been planning a future with, someone he had been introducing to aspects of his life and career that suggested their relationship was progressing toward something permanent and publicly acknowledged. They had been house hunting together in cities where both of their companies had regional offices, exploring opportunities that would allow them to work in the same location and build a life that didn't require the secrecy and deception that characterized their current arrangement. The investigation also revealed that Michael's relationship with Diane had been witnessed by more people than just Tommy, that their romantic partnership was becoming an open secret in their professional circles, known to colleagues and clients who assumed Michael was either divorced or separated from his wife. The casual way they interacted at industry events, the comfortable intimacy they displayed during business dinners, the assumption among their peers that they were a couple rather than colleagues, all suggested that Michael had been living as if he were single and available, while maintaining his marriage and family life as a convenient but secondary arrangement. What made this discovery particularly devastating was realizing that Michael had been preparing for a transition from our marriage to his relationship with Diane, planning a future that included ending his commitment to Tommy and me in favor of starting over with someone who represented excitement and possibility rather than routine and responsibility. The research he had been doing about divorce laws, the financial arrangements he had been making to protect assets from marital dissolution, the career moves he had been considering that would position him for a fresh start in a new city with a new partner. All of this planning had been happening while I focused on maintaining our family's stability and supporting his professional advancement, completely unaware that I was facilitating my own eventual replacement. My sister Rachel, who had always been my closest confidant and most trusted advisor, provided both emotional support and strategic guidance as I processed the evidence of Michael's comprehensive betrayal. Using Tommy as an unwitting witness to his affair while planning to abandon both of you for someone who makes him feel younger and more excited about life. Rachel helped me understand that what I was dealing with wasn't just adultery, but a form of family manipulation that involved our son, that Michael's behavior constituted emotional abuse of both Tommy and me through systematic deception and exploitation of our trust. Rachel's professional background in family law provided insights into the legal implications of Michael's deception and the strategies I could use to protect Tommy's interests in any custody proceedings that might result from exposing his father's affair and double life. She explained that family courts were particularly concerned about parents who involved children in deceptive activities, who exposed minors to adult situations they couldn't understand, who used their children's innocence as cover for behavior that violated their marriage vows and family commitments. Michael's willingness to conduct his affair in ways that Tommy could witness, his casual acceptance of our son's potential exposure to his romantic relationship with another woman, constituted evidence of poor judgment and priorities that would influence custody and visitation determinations. The strategy Rachel helped me develop was designed to expose Michael's affair while protecting Tommy from unnecessary trauma and ensuring that his father faced appropriate consequences for using our son's innocence as camouflage for his betrayal. Rather than confronting Michael immediately with all the evidence I had gathered, we decided to document everything comprehensively first. creating a legal record that would protect Tommy's interests and provide me with maximum leverage in any divorce proceedings. The goal wasn't just to end Michael's affair or punish his deception. It was to ensure that Tommy's future was protected from someone who had proven willing to use his trust and love as tools for facilitating activities that would ultimately destroy his family. The confrontation with Michael became inevitable when Tommy innocently asked when he would see Daddy's friend from the train station again, when they might meet her officially since she seemed so nice and made Daddy so happy. The casual way Tommy mentioned these expectations, plans he had apparently been thinking about since witnessing their interaction, questions that revealed how much the encounter had impressed him, forced me to realize that Michael's relationship with Diane was progressing toward some kind of revelation or transition that would involve Tommy. Whether I was prepared for it or not, my son was already processing the idea that his father had important relationships I knew nothing about, already wondering when these parallel worlds would be integrated in ways he could understand and participate in more fully. The confrontation took place on a Wednesday evening after Tommy was asleep, when Michael was relaxed and unsuspecting, after returning from what he claimed was a successful client meeting in Philadelphia, but which I now knew had been another romantic getaway with Diane. I presented him with a selection of the evidence I had gathered: photos from his social media accounts, credit card statements showing companion accommodations, the private investigator's documentation of his activities with Diane, and asked him simply, "Who is the woman Tommy saw you with at the train station?" The transformation on his face was immediate and complete. The casual confidence of someone who believed his deception was perfect, replaced by the trapped panic of someone who realized that months of careful lies had been exposed by his own child's innocent observation. Michael's response to being confronted with irrefutable evidence of his affair revealed exactly who I had been married to for 12 years. Someone who viewed his family as an obligation to be managed rather than a commitment to be honored. Someone who believed his personal happiness justified any level of deception and manipulation. Someone who had been planning to replace us with a newer, more exciting version of family life, while using our trust and resources to facilitate that transition. His explanation wasn't an apology or an expression of remorse. It was a justification for behavior he portrayed as reasonable and inevitable, given the changes in our marriage and his evolving needs and desires. "I never meant for Tommy to see us, and I never planned for you to find out this way. But Diane makes me feel alive in ways that our marriage hasn't for years," he said, as if his emotional satisfaction justified systematically lying to his wife and son, as if the decline in our romantic connection was something that had happened to him, rather than something he had contributed to through his emotional investment in another relationship. "I've been trying to figure out how to handle the situation in a way that would be best for everyone, especially Tommy, but it's complicated when you're dealing with feelings this strong and this real." The most chilling aspect of Michael's response wasn't his refusal to apologize or take responsibility for his deception. It was his assumption that now that I knew about Diane, we could work together to create a co-parenting arrangement that would allow him to pursue his relationship with her while maintaining access to Tommy on terms that didn't interfere with his plans for building a new life. He had clearly been preparing for this conversation for months, had developed strategies for managing the crisis of discovery that prioritized his relationship with Diane and his vision of future happiness over the emotional well-being of the wife and son he was abandoning for someone who represented excitement rather than commitment. His casual mention of Tommy's potential role in his future plans with Diane was what revealed the true scope of his selfishness and manipulation. Our son would be welcome in their new life as a weekend visitor, someone who could provide evidence of Michael's character as a devoted father, while not interfering with the romantic relationship that had become his priority. Tommy would be reduced from being the center of a stable family structure to being a scheduling consideration, in his father's pursuit of personal satisfaction with someone who had never made any commitment to his well-being, or long-term security. The legal proceedings that followed Michael's exposure were swift and decisive, largely because the evidence of his systematic deception was overwhelming, and his casual attitude toward involving Tommy in his affair demonstrated clearly that his judgment about parenting priorities was fundamentally flawed. Family courts have seen many cases of adultery, but fewer where the unfaithful parent has so blatantly used their child as unwitting cover for their betrayal, where the deception has been so comprehensive that it threatened the child's understanding of family stability and trustworthiness. The judge's comments during our custody hearing made it clear that she viewed Michael's behavior as evidence of someone who would prioritize his own romantic satisfaction over his child's emotional security, someone who couldn't be trusted to make parenting decisions that served Tommy's interest rather than his own convenience. The custody arrangement that emerged from our divorce reflected the court's understanding that Michael had proven himself willing to involve Tommy in adult situations he couldn't understand, to use our son's innocence as camouflage for activities that threatened his family's stability. Michael's visitation was structured to protect Tommy from further exposure to his father's romantic relationships, until those relationships became stable and appropriate for a child to witness, until Michael could demonstrate that he understood the difference between being Tommy's father and being someone who used his son's presence to facilitate his own dating life. But the most satisfying aspect of the legal resolution wasn't the custody arrangement or the financial settlement. It was watching Michael realize that his carefully planned transition from our marriage to his relationship with Diane had been completely derailed by his own carelessness and arrogance. Diane, who had believed she was entering a relationship with a man who was honestly ending his marriage and preparing to build a future with her, was horrified to discover that she had been dating someone who was still actively maintaining his family life while lying to everyone about his intentions and timeline for making their relationship public and permanent. Without understanding its significance, was more than Diane's conscience could accept. Her departure from Michael's life left him facing the consequences of his choices alone. Without the relationship he had sacrificed his family to pursue, without the future he had been planning while deceiving everyone who trusted him, the karma was swift and comprehensive. He lost both his marriage and his affair, both his family stability and his romantic excitement, both his son's daily presence and his mistress's companionship. At this point in my story, I need to pause and ask you something that still shapes my understanding of trust and family protection. If you discovered that your spouse had been conducting an affair in ways that your child could witness, using your son or daughter as unwitting cover for romantic activities while planning to transition from your family to a new relationship, what would you do? Would you focus on protecting your child from further exposure to adult deception, even if it complicated your own process of seeking justice? Would you prioritize exposing the betrayal immediately, regardless of the impact on people who had done nothing wrong? Would you seek consequences that matched the scope of the manipulation? Or would you focus on healing and building a better future for yourself and your child? Tell me in the comments what you think you would choose, because the decisions I made about handling Michael's betrayal affected not just my own recovery, but Tommy's understanding of what healthy relationships should look like, what trust really means, what happens when the people who should protect you use your love as a tool for hurting someone else. The strategy I developed for rebuilding our lives after Michael's betrayal was focused on helping Tommy understand that his innocent observation had been the key to protecting our family from someone who had been systematically deceiving us, that his honesty about what he had witnessed was brave and important, rather than something he should feel guilty about. The goal was to help Tommy process the changes in our family structure without carrying responsibility for events that were entirely his father's choice, without feeling that his casual comment about seeing Daddy at the train station had somehow caused the destruction of our family, rather than simply revealed destruction that was already happening. The therapy sessions that became part of Tommy's routine were designed to help him understand that adults who ask children to keep secrets about their activities are usually doing something wrong, that his observation and honest reporting of what he had witnessed was exactly what he should have done in that situation. The child psychologist we worked with specialized in helping children whose parents had involved them in deceptive activities, teaching Tommy that his father's choices about relationships and honesty were adult decisions that he couldn't influence or prevent, that his love for his father didn't require him to accept treatment that made him confused or uncomfortable. But the most important healing came from the conversations Tommy and I had about the difference between supporting someone you love and being used by someone you trust, between being included in family activities and being used as cover for family betrayal. Tommy learned that healthy relationships are built on truth rather than secrets, that people who truly love you will never use your presence to facilitate activities that hurt other people you care about, that his observations and questions about adult behavior were always welcome and important, rather than something he should feel nervous about sharing. The transformation in Tommy following our family's restructuring was gradual but profound, reflecting the relief that comes from living in an environment where adult problems are handled by adults, where children aren't asked to carry information they don't understand, where love doesn't require managing other people's emotions or keeping secrets that make you feel uncomfortable. The anxiety and confusion he'd been carrying about his father's behavior, questions about why Daddy seemed different when he came home from work trips, concerns about why some of Daddy's stories didn't match what Tommy had observed, disappeared once he no longer had to navigate the cognitive dissonance between what he was seeing and what he was being told. The new traditions Tommy and I created together were built on foundations of transparency and trust that our previous family life had been missing, even when I hadn't realized what was absent. Our weekend adventures became genuine mother-son time, not opportunities to document our happiness for someone else's consumption, or ways to fill time while the other parent pursued secret relationships. We developed rituals around honesty and communication, creating space for Tommy to share anything he observed or experienced, without fear that his honesty would cause problems or reveal information that adults wanted to keep hidden. The community of support that formed around Tommy and me, once the truth about Michael's systematic deception became known, was both surprising and deeply healing. Other divorced mothers shared stories of discovering that their children had been unknowingly exposed to their father's affairs, of learning that their trust had been exploited, not just as wives, but as parents who were working to protect their children's innocence and security. We created a network of families who understood that divorce involving child manipulation required different healing strategies than simple marital dissolution, that protecting children from adult deception was an ongoing process rather than a one-time conversation. The professional success I achieved after freeing myself from a marriage built on systematic lies and manipulation was remarkable in ways that surprised everyone who knew me, including myself. Without the constant stress of living with someone whose explanations never quite made sense, whose travel schedule seemed designed to maximize time away from family rather than serve legitimate professional purposes, I discovered energy and focus I hadn't possessed for years. The investigative skills I had developed while exposing Michael's affair translated into professional abilities that brought both personal satisfaction and financial independence that could never be threatened by someone else's selfish choices or secret agendas. The legal advocacy work I began, focusing on protecting children from being used as unwitting accomplices to parental deception, became a passion that gave meaning to the trauma Tommy and I had experienced. Our story became part of a larger conversation about family court reform, about recognizing that involving children in marital deception constitutes emotional abuse, about creating better systems for protecting children whose parents use their innocence as tools for facilitating betrayal. The train station sighting that had seemed like an innocent coincidence became evidence in legal proceedings that strengthened protections for other children whose trust was being exploited by adults, who should have been protecting them. The writing I began about family, deception, and child protection gave me a platform to reach parents who might be unknowingly exposing their children to adult situations that could cause lasting psychological harm. The response from readers was consistently the same. Recognition that they too had been dismissing their children's observations about family dynamics that didn't make sense, accepting explanations that required them to doubt their own perceptions, making excuses for behavior that involved their children in ways that made them uncomfortable. My story gave them permission to trust what their children were seeing and reporting, to investigate what didn't make sense, rather than accepting explanations that required them to ignore their parental protective instincts. 2 years after Tommy's innocent observation about seeing his father at the train station destroyed my marriage and ultimately saved our lives, I can say with certainty that learning the truth, however painful, was the greatest gift my son ever gave me. His casual comment about Daddy not traveling alone opened a door I had been unconsciously avoiding, revealed rooms in Michael's life I had never been invited to enter, exposed a deception so systematic that continuing to live within it would have eventually destroyed both our sense of reality and our capacity for authentic relationship. Tommy, now 10 years old and thriving in ways that wouldn't have been possible if we had remained in a family structure built on systematic deception, has internalized lessons about honesty and trust that will protect him throughout his life. He knows that his observations and questions about adult behavior are valuable and important. The people who truly love him will never use his presence to facilitate activities that hurt other people he cares about. That healthy relationships are built on truth, rather than secrets that make you feel confused or uncomfortable. The relationship Tommy has with his father now is limited and carefully structured to protect him from further manipulation, while acknowledging the biological reality of their connection. Michael's attempts to rebuild trust with Tommy have been sporadic and self-serving, focused more on his own comfort than on his son's healing, more concerned with maintaining his image as a good father than with doing the work of earning forgiveness for his deception and betrayal. Tommy has learned to manage these interactions with age-appropriate boundaries, to love his father without accepting responsibility for his choices, to enjoy what's positive while protecting himself from disappointment and further confusion about adult relationships and commitments. The most meaningful validation came from other children who had been unknowingly involved in their parents' deceptive activities. Kids who had carried information they didn't understand about adult situations that made them feel uncomfortable or confused. Through support groups and family therapy sessions, Tommy met other children who had witnessed pieces of parental affairs, who had been asked to keep secrets from their other parent, who had been used as cover for romantic activities they were too young to comprehend. The relief on these children's faces when they realized they weren't alone in their experiences, that they hadn't caused their families problems by observing and reporting what they had seen, was profound and healing for everyone involved. The financial recovery process included not only the substantial divorce settlement that reflected Michael's systematic deception and misuse of family resources, but also the peace of mind that came from knowing our family's future was secure and independent of anyone else's romantic choices or professional obligations. The money Michael had been spending on romantic getaways disguised as business trips was now available for Tommy's education and activities, for creating the kind of stable, honest family environment where children could thrive without worrying about adult secrets or managing parental emotions they didn't understand. But the most profound transformation wasn't in our financial situation or living arrangements. It was in our relationship with truth itself and our commitment to building a family culture where honesty was valued over convenience, where children's observations were trusted rather than dismissed, where love was demonstrated through transparency rather than through gifts and explanations that required people to doubt their own perceptions. Tommy and I developed new ways of communicating that honored his intelligence and curiosity while maintaining age-appropriate boundaries, creating space for him to share anything he noticed or experienced without fear that his honesty would cause problems or reveal secrets that adults wanted to keep hidden. The community response to our story was overwhelmingly supportive, but it also revealed how common it is for children to witness pieces of parental deception without understanding what they're seeing. How many families are operating with secrets and lies that threaten their emotional security and psychological well-being. The legal advocacy work I began, working to strengthen protections for children who are unknowingly involved in parental infidelity, became a platform for reaching other families who might be struggling with similar situations, other parents who might be dismissing their children's observations because those observations were inconvenient or challenging. The speaking engagements that grew from my advocacy work took me to family courts and parenting conferences across the country, where I shared the story of how a child's innocent observation at a train station exposed years of systematic deception and ultimately protected both of our lives. The response from audiences was consistently the same. Recognition that they too had been accepting explanations that didn't quite make sense, dismissing their children's questions about adult behavior that seemed inconsistent, making excuses for family dynamics that required everyone to ignore obvious inconsistencies in favor of maintaining comfortable illusions. The writing I began during our healing process, starting with articles about protecting children from adult deception and expanding into a book about family honesty and child protection, gave me a platform to reach parents who might be unknowingly exposing their children to situations that could cause lasting psychological harm. The response from readers was gratitude for permission to trust their children's observations, validation that their concerns about family dynamics were legitimate, encouragement to investigate what didn't make sense, rather than accepting explanations that required them to doubt their own parental instincts and protective impulses. The educational programs I developed focused on teaching parents to recognize the signs that their children might be witnessing adult deception, to understand that children's seemingly innocent observations often contain crucial information about family dynamics that need attention and investigation. The workshops emphasize that children who report seeing things that don't match the family narrative aren't being disloyal or causing problems. They're providing valuable information that can protect the family from ongoing deception and manipulation. 3 years after Tommy's casual observation about his father not traveling alone destroyed our understanding of our family structure, but ultimately saved us from continued deception. I can say with certainty that children often see truths that adults have been trained to ignore, that innocence can be both a vulnerability that needs protection and a strength that exposes lies others can't or won't acknowledge. The train station sighting that seemed like a coincidence became the key to unlocking years of systematic betrayal, the evidence we needed to escape from relationships built on lies and rebuild our lives on foundations strong enough to support genuine love and authentic connection. Tommy's innocent excitement about seeing his father with another woman wasn't just evidence of Michael's affair. It was proof that he had been willing to conduct his deception in ways that our son could witness, that he had been so confident in his ability to maintain his lies that he felt no need to be careful about when and where he displayed his romantic relationship with someone who wasn't his wife. The casualness with which he had included Diane in his public activities, the comfort he had shown in being seen with her by anyone who might know him, revealed someone who had stopped caring whether his deception was discovered because he had already made his choice about which relationship mattered more to him. The most unexpected gift of this entire ordeal was discovering that my son's honesty and observational skills, which had initially seemed to threaten our family stability, were actually the tools that protected us from continued manipulation and deception. Tommy's willingness to share what he had seen, his excitement about his father's apparent happiness, his innocent questions about when he might meet Daddy's friend officially, all of these responses were exactly what they should have been from a child who had been raised to trust his perceptions and communicate openly about his experiences. The therapy and support that helped Tommy process his role in exposing his father's deception emphasized that his honesty had been brave and important, rather than something he should feel guilty about, that children who tell the truth about what they observe are protecting their families, rather than causing problems. This lesson will serve him well throughout his life, helping him resist people who might try to convince him to doubt his own perceptions, to keep secrets that make him uncomfortable, to prioritize other people's convenience over his own sense of truth and justice. The legal reforms that resulted from our advocacy work focus specifically on protecting children from being used as unwitting accomplices to parental deception, on recognizing that exposing children to adult situations